at different aspects of that, and as well as Elena is going to dig in a little bit into orphan well methane abatement, but it's all generally around existing infrastructure and the challenges it poses, as well as some of the opportunities that it has associated with it as well. So what we're going to do then is I'm going to kick off proceedings. So we're going to have three talks, starting with myself, then Bob, and then Elena, and I'll introduce those guys once we get going. But we're basically going to have about 15 to 20 minutes of slides from each of us, and then we'll have a few minutes for questions after each talk, if there's any questions from the audience, and at the end we'll have 10 or so minutes around open more Q&A and discussion as wished for by the audience on the topics we cover. So assuming everyone can still see okay and hear me fine before I get started.
Good, looks good.
Okay, excellent. So yeah, so thanks for joining everybody. I'm Aaron Cahill. I'm Associate Professor of Applied Geosciences based in the Lyell Centre at Heriot-Watt University in the UK. And I'll kick off the talks, as I mentioned. So we're going to talk to you today about some of the work I've been involved in recently on legacy wells and their integrity, looking at failure, integrity and leakage, and really trying to focus a bit more on how we try to manage those risks through understanding how wells fail and what the consequences of leakage are. And I'm going to present some work from several different projects with lots of colleagues involved. So who am I? I'm, as I mentioned, Aaron Cahill, Associate Professor of Applied Geoscience, and I've been looking at wells and leakage from wells for about 13 years or so now. And I've got a research group here at the university where we're looking at several different aspects and some colleagues in a collaborative environment. We call ourselves the Geoenergy Environmental Risk and Impact Lab, and really interested in lots of different aspects of legacy wells and their potential impacts on the environment and how to manage and mitigate that, including methane leakage from oil and gas wells, but also a lot of interest in carbon capture and storage and the risks to containment by legacy wells and leakage of stored CO2 from those. It's just, if anyone's, just everyone mute their microphone. I think I can hear a little bit of feedback there. So just keep it nice and clear for everybody. If everyone could just mute. Okay, so setting the scene then. As everyone will be aware, I'm sure, we've had a long period of development of oil and gas in the last 150 years. No one really knows actually exactly how many oil and gas wells have been drilled worldwide. There's no kind of global regulator or global body that collects that information. Some people say there's about 10 million or so wells globally. Others say it could be north of 15 million wells. And you can see here with this map from IHS Markit, where we have some heat shading for where wells have been drilled, and all across the world, in every corner of the globe, people have been drilling for oil and gas, as we know, and in particular, of course, you guys in North America have been particularly busy. You can see very, very hot patches there across the United States and Canada. And even though we of course talk a lot these days about the energy transition and move into different sources of energy with less reliance on fossil fuel in many parts of the world, that doesn't stop the fact that we, of course, already drilled these many millions of wells, which will still exist regardless of which energy sources we use going forwards. And our plan, of course, is that we should decommission those old wells when they reach the end of their useful lives, and that when we decommission and plug them, they would be sealed in perpetuity. Here's an example of one of the first wells drilled in England. And in 1919, this is Hardstoffe number 1. This is what it looks like today. It's actually in a garden centre, and it's used as a little bit of a museum exhibit. And you can see there clearly there's still some small levels of oil seepage coming out of that old well. And it's just a bit of a curiosity when the old folks go at the weekend to have a cup of coffee and buy some plants for the garden. They take a look at this at the garden centre. But it just goes to show these wells don't go anywhere. Everyone what's been drilled will be there, whether it's buried under the soils or whether we can see it at surface. Something I've been particularly interested in the last years is thinking about this in the context of new geoenergy applications. So as we move towards different uses of the subsurface, maybe for geothermal or carbon capture and storage, hydrogen storage, we're going to have all these old wells, these legacy wells from petroleum production in and amongst any new geoenergy applications, because typically where we use the subsurface, again, it's often in the old oil and gas basins where we have information on the geology and we know what we have there to use for these different applications. And so there's lots of interest around what implications these legacy wells would have on new uses of the subsurface. One thing to recognize, unfortunately, is that these legacy wells can suffer integrity failure and leak, for want of a better word. We have release or movement, unintended movement of fluids along them. Here's a selection of just a couple of or 4 different papers where scientists have looked into well leakage from legacy wells. Couple there from offshore, couple from onshore. These are just a tiny sprinkling. There's been many studies, more and more every year, with people looking at these legacy wells to either identify or check for leakage, or where leakage is detected, to try and understand that. And so for a while there was a bit of a debate around whether or not there was any issue with leakage from legacy wells, but I think really the science has moved on, that there can be a subset of wells where leakage occurs. And so rather than trying to argue if it does or doesn't occur, what we need to do is think about solutions and ways to manage and mitigate that issue. So if we're talking about leakage and from these legacy wells, we're really talking about integrity and integrity failure of the well system and its barriers. What do we mean by well integrity? It isn't actually one single thing or one single barrier. Well integrity, at least in my world, actually is a combination of aspects of the well, which includes the barriers which it is comprised of, but it also involves a series of activities and the regulatory framework under which the well was constructed, completed, and then abandoned. So it's more of a general concept, which includes both the activities, the processes, and the physical barriers. And it's there to reduce any risk of uncontrolled fluid movement. Often with legacy wells, we've got a well which has been plugged and abandoned, and oftentimes cut, capped, and buried below the ground surface if it's onshore, or even below the seabed if it's offshore. And so actually we might not see anything at all at surface. There might be just some ground, some grass in a field, or some seabed, but a few meters below that would be the top of the well where it's been cut, capped, and buried. And then below that we have that well structure going down, intersecting that geology, and still sitting there with the plugs and so on as it was designed and abandoned. What is the failure of that system then? Well, of course, these are quite complex structures, so many things could go wrong, and there could be different aspects of the system which fail to more or lesser extents. And typically, at least in my experience, it's never usually a simple aspect what we can pinpoint which has failed. It's typically a breakdown in one or more of these barriers, and often it's very complex and a multifaceted issue, and it's hard to tell exactly what's failed. But there are multiple different aspects of the well structure where failure or loss of integrity can occur, which can lead to leakage, including the annular space, the plugs themselves, the casings, rock to rock, rock to cement barriers, and so on and so forth. So lots of potential areas where the failure can occur, and it's not always the case that we know exactly why leakage has occurred, just we can notice that it has. Here's an example of some eccentricity in a casing string here. So one thing to point out is we often, back on this slide, we often think about what fails after the well has been plugged and abandoned, but maybe we never actually attained full integrity in a well when it was constructed. And this diagram shows maybe what we had on paper or what we think was constructed. In reality, might not look like that. Maybe we have eccentricity in the casing strings, which means then that the cement doesn't place properly, and we get these areas where there's no cement placement, or maybe poor cement bonding, and so on. So it's not always necessarily a later stage failure, but possibly a lack of integrity was gained at the beginning of the well's construction and completion. So well integrities are increasing in importance across the globe, both onshore and offshore. Lots of stories in the news, quite a topical issue. Here's a couple of examples from Canada, people talking about aging oil wells being a ticking time bomb there, and talking here about some of the costs associated with orphan well re-abandonment and remediation. And this rumbles on every 6 months to a year. We see more of these types of stories coming out particularly across North America, and also the US and Canada, but also in the UK and in Europe. Something I've found very interesting and was recently in discussions with colleagues at University of Houston about was this idea about zombie wells, something in Texas has been catching the headlines recently, where there's been evidence of brine leakage along old legacy wells. And we see here some examples from the Houston Chronicle investigative series where you get some brine leakage and pooling at surface from some of these old wells, and certainly some clear risks and environmental impacts there. And so this is exactly the type of issue I'm describing, where we have an old well, there's some lack of integrity in that system, and fluids are able to move up towards the surface and cause issues. And as I said, offshore as well, we certainly definitely get these issues. It's much less documented, I think, just with the how difficult it is to do field work or different types of screening or monitoring at offshore sites. But there are documented cases where we get evidence that there's leakage of offshore wells, and so there's nothing really to suggest that offshore wells are any different than onshore. So we should expect there'd also be some issues there. Of course, however, maybe the receptors and what is being impacted might be quite different and less impactful directly to humans, or less noticeable. And that's certainly an area where we need more research, I think, in the coming years. So as a researcher, I'm completely biased, but I have to say this is a topic which was really, really exciting to be working in. There's lots of aspects of legacy well leakage that need understanding. It's a multidisciplinary issue. We need to understand everything from petroleum engineering and well completion design, and all the way through to multi-phase flow in the porous media with the fluids moving along or outside of the well structure. And we have to actually understand the reactive transport processes of that gas or fluids and how they interact with the geology and other fluids, and all the way up to the surface, and what we might see then, how the fluids might come out of this gas emitting to the atmosphere, and what that looks like and what controls that, which I'll talk about in a little while. But definitely a really interesting research area with lots of different aspects to try and understand. Okay, so that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour on legacy wells and why they're of interest and importance in terms of their integrity and its failure. What I wanted to switch to, or pivot to a little bit for the next few minutes before I'll sort of close up my talk and we'll move on to Bob and Elena, is I want to talk about a bit of a field laboratory that my colleagues and I have developed over the last years, of a real case study of a leaking well in British Columbia in Canada, up in the northeast corner of British Columbia, a little town called Fort St. John. The well sits there in you see the yellow star, and it's in a region of quite heavy oil and gas development. This is an area where there's been a huge amount of unconventional development since the early 2000s, so a lot of fracking in this area. And our field site, well site J, as it's affectionately known, is a well drilled in 2007, so not an old well by any stretch of the imagination. And we've been looking at that for a few years, and I just want to talk you guys through some of the learnings of that well, and since we discovered there was leakage from it, what we're trying to do there. Okay, what does well site J look like? It looks like this. It's not really as sinister as someone might imagine. It's actually in a farm field. The farmer there's been growing wheat and different crops quite happily since that well was drilled, then plugged and abandoned. It's there, if you want to see exactly where it is. And recently, we've been going out to the well since 2022. Every year, we in fact, colleagues and I, a couple of colleague on the call here, we're going to head out in 4 weeks with my PhD student Ben, who's on the call. We're going to go back out and be doing some field work there. But we published a couple of papers. Happy to share these around if people are interested. But really, what our work there's been about is about understanding that well, understanding that leakage, to try and then look for or develop methods to manage leakage at wells like that, and looking for mitigation and management solutions to deal with the issues of well leakage and its consequences. What does the field work look like? What we do, here's a bit of an action shot. Hopefully you guys can see the video moving around here from the drone. So this is Ben, who's helping here on the site, measuring the gases coming out of the ground around that cut, capped and buried well. We have soil sensors, we've got geophysical lines running across there for electrical resistivity tomography and electromagnetic surveys, and we take soil samples and we try to understand the leakage at that site, what it's doing, what the implications are, and how we might manage and address that. So just a little snapshot or an advertisement really on what we were able to learn from this field site. Here's a field campaign from a couple of years ago with another bachelor student helping me on this project, James, and we're doing different flux measurements there in the middle of summer. One of the things we're able to do at this well site is measure actual leakage rates quite accurately with some state-of-the-art flux chamber systems. And what we notice is that we have methane as one of the primary emitting gases coming from that well, but there's also quite a lot of CO2 coming out of the soils around there, which is associated with the methane breakdown. The leaked methane is being broken down by the soils, which I'll talk about in a second. That's a very important observation. But one of the things we've been able to do in the first instance is just to say, well, how much leakage is coming out of that well? What does that actually look like in terms of mass, in terms of micromoles? And we add together the methane and the CO2 fluxes to come up with a total excess emissions in CO2 equivalents. And these are the types of measurements and numbers which can start to help us understand how big an issue or not this might be in the grand scheme of different emissions sources and factors, and what types of values might even feed into things like carbon credits and so on if we were to look at plug and abandoning this well, or what would be gained by actually remediating this well. More recently this year, we've been really interested working with our colleagues at the University of Waterloo, Dr. Colby Steelman and one of his students there, where we've been actually applying shallow environmental geophysics across the top of that leaking well. We know the well's leaking, we're measuring the leakage rates. So what's been really interesting is to do electrical resistivity and electromagnetic surveys. And you can see here a couple of snapshots from the electrical resistivity surveys where the top panel shows very clearly the well structure buried beneath the soils by a few meters, about 10 feet there. But above that, even more interestingly, because we're not surprised, we can see a big metal tube under the ground with geophysics. That's exactly what geophysics is for. But what we've been really excited by is that we can actually see signs of the leakage footprint, the gases migrating through those soils into the atmosphere, actually visible geophysically. And you can see there in that bottom left panel a nice geophysical anomaly where the leakage is at surface, where the leaking gases change the properties of the soils, meaning this is a really promising approach for monitoring and detection of leakage at cut-capped and buried wells. I mentioned earlier, one thing what we've been really interested at this site is that we actually see more CO2 coming out of the soils at the leaking well than we do methane. The well is not leaking CO2, it is leaking methane, but the soils, that 10 feet of soils between the cut and capped well and the surface, are really efficient at breaking down the methane. Microbes in that soil between the well and the surface can use that methane as an energy source, and they convert it into CO2 along this kind of classic reaction here. Methane add oxygen in an aerobic reaction, goes to CO2 and water. And what we find interestingly is if you plot a flux footprint here, so looking down from above, the methane footprint of this well on the right-hand side is actually quite small, only about 5 square feet area is the methane footprint. So quite a small footprint to pick out, but the CO2 footprint is much larger because of all that methane breaking down. And that really got us interested about if we could harness this process or even foster it, make it work even harder to get all of that methane to break down, as having quite some significant benefits in terms of emissions to atmosphere, with CO2 being a much less potent greenhouse gas than methane. Through some of our soil samples that we've taken over the last few years, we've been able to see the different types of microbes what live in the soil at that wellhead. So here on the top left A panel of this plot, you can see WH indicates the wellhead and the BG is the background in these plots. And what we see is that the soil microbes at the wellhead are very, very different than at the background locations in that field. So you've got a very bespoke and specialized community of microbes what have grown to live in those soils where the leakage is. And when we look at who that is at the genus level, we're seeing these highly elevated levels of these more colorful bars in the B panel, methylomonadaceae, baerenkiaceae, and sulfocapsaceae. These guys are clearly elevated beyond what we see in that field naturally. And in that bottom C panel, we can drill down to the actual species level, and we're able to identify that some of these microbes here, Methylocystis rosea, SC2 and SB2, Methylocella tundrae, these microbes are highly elevated at that leaking well soil right above it, so they surely are very clearly linked with that methane oxidation process. And that, as an example, is what we've been really interested to try and understand a bit more, because if we could foster this to happen at any well, or encourage that methane oxidation process, it could really fix and reduce the emissions footprint from these leaking wells. And from some of that data, it's enabled us to build some in-house methane oxidation models, where we can model the extents of oxidation, which changes with the seasons. So you can see here an output from one of the internal models we've built, Omega model, where we see the daily oxidation potential as an uncertainty prediction interval. So there's obviously some variability we'd expect, but we think that in the summer months in this region of Canada, we could have anything from 75 to up to nearly 200 grams of methane per meter squared per day of methane being broken down in those soils. In the winter, we get a bit more challenged. It's very cold up there in the winter. It can be minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit up there. And so we expect at that point the microbes stop working, but certainly in the summer months and the shoulder seasons, we could have quite some significant oxidation. And then we've started to think a little bit about how much soil you'd need for full breakdown. And so from this data that we get from the field, we're able to come up with things like these sizing curves here, where we can look at different leak rates and how much area of soil would be needed to break down different extents of that methane. And so here we're quite excited to be using this site to help develop these tools to predict the soil oxidation potential and design these potential mitigation systems. All right, so that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour. So I don't want to take too much longer, because I'm more interested and excited to get on to Bob and Marilena. So just to finish up then, my outlook here from this work is that legacy wells, there's many millions globally. It's a growing challenge where we have this integrity failure at these legacy wells that people are recognizing and having to deal with more and more. And it certainly needs various solutions to make the dealing with it much more efficient and cost effective. And what I've certainly learned is that the field investigations at these real case studies provide critical data which can help advance understanding. They can help us develop methods for monitoring detection, and also help us figure out what the best ways are really to manage and mitigate leakage at these sites, to minimize both the environmental impact and risk to any receptors. But absolutely, it's a really growing and developing area of research, at least in my academic view. So there's much to do, many solutions I think we need to start finding, and it's possible to find in the next years. So in that case, huge opportunity for work in that area. And I'll say thanks to all the collaborators and co-authors on these papers who have made this possible, and different funding agencies have helped fund some of this research. And I'll stop and take any immediate couple of questions before we hear from Bob. So any comments or questions?
Dr. Aaron, we have asked people to type the questions in the chat, and we can just read from the chat and answer it in an orderly fashion.
Oh, well, if that's how you want to do it, I'm all right to let people speak as well, Sabia, but if you want to do it that way, that's fine.
Yes, we want to avoid unnecessary unmuting. So
Okay,
there was
yeah,
one question in the chat, so you can.
Okie dokie, I'll just change my screen so I can see here. All right, so let's have a look then. Okay, do legacy wells from onshore and offshore have the same leakage processes and the same detection methods? So, yeah, as I mentioned, in theory they should, but in practice they don't. As I mentioned, obviously very different environments. You know, offshore you could be talking tens of meters of water column. So, you know, subsea underwater monitoring and measurements, as we're obviously onshore, we're on the dry land and it's much easier to move around. But obviously the leakage processes are, of course, somewhat similar. We have a source, a point source, we have gas with a pressure differential coming out. So yeah, I think, you know, quite different environments. And really, if we look at onshore understanding and onshore investigations, there's so much more been done onshore because it's just easier, it's just cheaper to do it, and more obvious to see wells where there's an issue to actually investigate. Onshore is light years behind in terms of recognition that there's a problem or there's leakage. And I've seen very few papers, like less than 10% of what you get published onshore. So good question, but yeah, definitely very, very different processes. Any other comments or questions or points? If not, we'll have time at the end as well for a bit more of a joint discussion. So I'll take at that point, there's nothing more for now. So in that case, I'm going to hand over to Bob in a second. Bob, do you want to start sharing your screen?
See if I can get there. I got the full screen going because I think there's problems if you don't go full screen right away before you
Let's
share.
see. Yeah, we're not seeing you yet. Let's see if we can get you on, Bob.
No, I think this is the full screen. Well, let's hope this is the full screen version. Yeah, full screen.
Perfect, Bob. Yeah, that's looking very good. Okay, so we're almost ready to go. So let me introduce then Bob Barber. Thank you so much, Bob. Really appreciate you taking the time here. So Bob is one of industry's leading voices on recompletions and refracts. I've been learning and been good to have a look at what Bob's been working on. Really fascinating. He's authored quite a few publications and lots of presentations on recompletions, over 50 published articles on petrophysics, and he's been teaching in the industry on and around this topic since 2009. Very good paper from 2009 in SPE, which helped move the industry away from a pump and pray approach for refracts towards mechanical isolation. And in 2018, Bob received the SPE Regional Formation Evaluation Award. Bob's had done lots of things in a long career. As one of the things I think is really interesting, Bob served as an expert witness in the BP Macondo trial and has been nominated for multiple distinguished lecturer programs at SPE, and he continues to teach both this SCA 2-day recompletion course and the Saga Wisdom online course. So Bob is an absolute wealth of knowledge. He's going to be talking about how hydrocarbon production in the end-of-life wells can still be improved economically with a subsequent stimulation treatment, so a recompletion or a bullhead refrac. And I think Bob is going to walk us through a couple of case studies to show how there's a lot of economic potential in recompleting, particularly in the Eagle Ford condensate context. So Bob, why don't you go ahead and tell us all about it? Thanks very much.
Thank you, Aaron. I'm going to present two case studies in two areas that we're working on my consulting company on the left, and then my operating company are working on two different projects, one on the condensate window and one on the dry gas, vertical dry gas out in West Texas. So hopefully it'll add some value here. This is the license plate on my car in the garage. Kind of tells my business plan. I'm sure everybody knows what P&As are, what we're talking about. And then the 2P1 is we're trying to convert P&As into P1 producing reserves. So that's the key goal of my company. Some people spend money on marketing programs. I've got a $200 license plate for mine, so I'm in good shape there. Inactive wells and low producing wells. I mean, we're talking about inactive wells, but low producing wells are soon to become inactive. They both have a high probability of plugging abandonment coming up in the future. And there's numerous things you can do, numerous options. One is just keep running them until you have to P&A them. And Texas has passed a law this legislative session that after September 2027, if you have a well that's been shut in for more than 15 years or inactive, you are required to plug it. That was previously an open-ended deal where you just kept renewing it and showing proof that everything was fine. Now we're being forced to do that. So you're going to see a lot of activity in the P&A space in Texas coming up after that time. Second is to do a refrac on the existing perforations. Would be a bullhead isolation, and it's one mechanically as a person go in above and below them. And then the EOR is an option, and it's getting more and more interesting. But right now we don't really have anything that can compete with recompletion economics. EOR is definitely, it works, but right now we don't have anything out there that can compete with that. So, and recompletions are definitely the best option. Why do recompletions work? For instance, Eagle Ford, you're only draining about 7.5 feet of reservoir with each cluster, and the original cluster spacing in some of these plays is over 100 feet. Most of the candidates we're looking at are, have at least 30 feet of cluster spacing or better. So that's why you're just not draining the rock unless you got to get the surface area established. These don't drain very much lateral length, so that's the key there. Conoco did this back in 2016, and it's no coincidence that they're the #1 refrac operator in the Eagle Ford right now. Refrac is not a recompletion. A refrac is basically a pump and pray. A recompletion is the same in a horizontal well as it is in a vertical well. You've got behind pipe pay, virgin rock that you go back in and drain with the new take points. Here's an example of a refrac versus a recompletion. You can see up on the left hand, the circle around refrac. That was a bullhead refrac. You can see it took the reserves from 95,000 barrels up to 122,000 barrels. Then they mechanically isolated the well and increased the production to 445. So, it's the refracs are definitely, and the refracs are economically only cost about $500,000, where the recompletions are probably $4 million plus. But you can see the difference in present value. You're getting a $5 million present value with a winery. You're only getting about a $900,000 present value PV10 with the refrac. Okay. This is what makes it work. Your early clusters were very wide, 70, 80 feet up here, 90 feet, some 75 feet, and down here. But mechanically, you really can't recomplete anything less than 20 feet. You can't isolate the perforations mechanically there. It's too close because you have we're going to talk about these longitudinal fractures coming up. But really, anything from here on back is fair game. So that whole interval there. And for Eagle Ford in particular, you've got, I think, close to 30,000 total wells, and about 14 to 15,000 wells are in this category here. And about a third of those are on pads that are wide enough space to be economic. Here's an example in the oil window, Eagle Ford and also Permian, same thing. And a lot of these over here, these dots here they're actually 40-foot cluster spacing, but very poor cluster efficiency. So they're actually way out here. A 40-foot cluster spacing with a 50% efficiency is actually 80 feet. And that's why you get these points bunched down here. These are actually effective cluster spacings out here on this. But basically, the uplift is from making the clusters closer together and recovering a higher percentage of the oil or gas in place. Here's an example from the Haynesville showing the same completions in terms of say the target's going to be in this area. Probably over 3,000 in the Haynesville, but not quite as many as Eagle Ford, but quite a few. Ideal legacy pads, wide cluster spacings we talked about. Mid-17 seemed to be when everybody got the bat signal that you need to go closer. It was one of the most interesting phenomena I've seen. It's like usually the whole industry doesn't turn around on a dime. It was within about 6 months, everybody went from wide to narrow on this. The word got out pretty quick. You want above average oil in place or gas in place for condensate, above average lateral length. It's all about, EUR per acre or oil in place per acre, gas in place per acre, more acreage with more length. Relatively wide well spacings, 660 in oil, 880 in condensate, 1320 in gas is unhindered. We consider that to be unhindered. Above that, you don't really get much increase in recovery factor. Below that, you do get reductions, though. Low recovery factor, of course, that's the main driver. And then you want to have all wells on the same pad. You don't want to, go have multiple pads you're trying at the same time. So that's basically a zipper frac or a simul frac is what you want to do on that. Okay, and again, we'll define legacy well as basically primarily pre-2017 completions, mainly on cluster spacing. Mechanically available, again, over 20 feet. You can't go too close, or you communicate with the original clusters. We're seeing evidence of that on some of these wells that are less than 20-foot cluster spacing. You're getting the equivalent of a super bullhead treatment, and you paid all this money for a liner. You don't want that to happen. So you've got to spread your clusters out to get around these guys. Case study I'll talk about first, one area that we're invested in. There's a lot of volumes in there, up to 80% of the recoverable oil and gas still in the ground. In some areas, it does vary. It's a function of the cumulative production. It's typically what your total volume is, how much of that you're going to get at the end of the day with both the combination of cumulative and uplift, and minus your cum. Fairly simple. What's going to come out minus what's already came out. So that's how we look at these, mainly from petrophysical point of view. And basically, we're actively bringing investors in this now to 3-to-1 ROI. And right now, preliminarily, we're seeing about a third of the Eagle Ford wells that are available should meet this criteria. Not all of them. So this is not going to be a panacea for every single well out there. It's got to be economic. I mean, you've got to pay out. And I think you'll see that, a pretty good chunk of these will be. But again, it's not something that's going to cure all the inactive well ills for everything. Sometimes you have wells too close together, yeah, it's, and the like, or spacing's too close together. And in those cases, that's where EOR come in. And on the new wells, we're really looking at EOR pretty hard. Anything with less than 20 cluster spacing to pressurize that or improve recovery, that's where your mixed acid comes on. And again, there's a large low production wells or inactive wells with economic potential all across the areas. Eagle Ford, it's a big one. The numbers we ran on a little study we put together for those third of the wells. If we got the 1/3 of the wells completed down there, that we're, of the total refrac candidates, over $40 billion. Everybody talks about an inventory problem. I mean, what inventory problem? It's basically you got lower AFEs, and these are shorter than new wells. New wells are typically 10 to 15,000 feet. The refracs average about 5,200 feet here. So it's a lower capital expense. Again, you're not getting the same reserves, but you're getting lower capital exposure on this. Basically, your numbers look good. I mean, we did a small study out in South Texas, and it's 12-month payout, 18-month payout, even at $45, which is becoming an issue. The pricing is an issue here. Operators are spending billions of dollars to get tier 1 locations, and they're sitting right on top of it. And one thing good, I like creating wealth, not redistributing it. It's my motto is trying to add value instead of just moving it around on the table. And recompletions are clearly that in that department, not in the redistribution side. The risk profile is equivalent or lower. We teach a whole course on this. I mean, it's once you understand how they work, you really don't have any anxiety about whether it's going to be riskier than a new well. It's certainly no riskier. Actually, it's less risk in some, because the new well, you still got to drill the well. You don't really know what's going to happen there. Well, these are already drilled. So, and you can tell what the mechanical condition is with diagnostics on it. You've got to spend some money on it. I mean, you're going to spend money prior to knowing you're going to refrac at those. It's not free. You got to go and make sure your well's cleaned out. You got to make sure your wellbore's in good shape. But by and large, it's pretty straightforward. And petrophysics is where I come in. The candidate selection is largely de-risked by estimating what's in the ground and and knowing how much came out. Again, over 1,100 white space pads, 3,300 total candidates. That's with the 3-to-1 criteria. Again, there's over 15,000 total wells that are inactive or marginal production prior to 2017. But strangely enough, most of these are not on operators' radars. Almost all the recompletions being done now in the Eagle Ford and other areas is on parent wells, on the existing wells, to try and protect the child wells from asymmetric fractures. Very few operators are going out there trying to actively increase their production with recompletions on multi-well legacy paths, and that's what we're focusing on right now. We're kicking off 2 programs here, hopefully in the next 6 months, where we're actually doing that, where we're going out and putting funds into these wells that go into these paths with operators with the non-op interest type stuff. Here's some results of that study, 19 pads. It's you're starting to talk real money here. That's $1.4 billion of uplift that right now has a current value of $52 million. So, and that's across the board. And this was random selection of 6 different operators. So this is the type of numbers we're talking about. So there's definitely money there. I mean, it's not you're not doing this just for your health. There's definitely some money to be made here in the refrac space, or recompletion space that we're talking about. Okay, the second area is vertical tight gas wells that we're working on. Largely ignored right now in the industry. Gas is the cleanest form of burning the hydrocarbons. It's in well drilling right now is not economic in a lot of areas. In West Texas is a big one on that. Overall, I'm preaching to the choir on some of this. Natural gas versus electric. I mean, I know everybody likes electric, but you got to consider you got to burn 3 times the carbon to generate the same amount of energy. You're converting that natural gas to electric, or even worse, coal. Natural gas vehicles, which I also have some interest in, a company that does that. It's half the carbon footprint of conventional gas or diesel engines, and actually half the carbon footprint of electric, because you've got to burn 3 times the hydrocarbons to get the same amount of energy to power that. Your Tesla or your Ford Lightning. My Ford Lightning burns half the carbon of my Ford CNG powered truck burns half the carbon of a Ford Lightning. And it's definitely the preferred method of electrical generation and standby power. And it's what people are talking about as far as generating, powering these data centers, and certainly the LNG exports. There's a lot of need for gas coming online here fairly soon. And I don't think we have it ready to go unless we look at stuff like I'm talking about here. And there's a really heavy concentration of economic active or shut-in wells in the Permian Basin, and that's mainly connected to the Waha gas system, gathering system. And that's because we're a victim of our own success. The Permian has been so successful in generating incremental oil production and associated gas that we keep filling the pipelines up. And it's been, this operating the field out there has been a real challenge, because you go from getting paid every other month, and sometimes your prices are severely discounted over the NYMEX or Henry Hub, and it's definitely a challenge. But I think that's fixing to turn around here, hopefully, put it in Texan terms. And again, several recent presentations I've been to, all the big conferences, basically a bunch of them, and they're all saying, well, we're going to have this huge demand coming on for LNG and data centers, and where's it going to come from? And everybody says, oh, it's got to come from the Permian, right? Well, until we get these pipelines in, that's not going to happen. You can't get gas to the market right now. I mean, the pipelines are pretty full. I mean, I think it just opened up a little bit now, but it's right now that's a big problem. And in response to this, I mean, the people pay attention. I mean, in defense of the industry, the midstream industry, they got the bat signal a couple of years ago, and they realized that, wait a minute, this is a train wreck. If we don't start getting more gas out of the Permian, we can't make these things work. I mean, because all the other areas have constraints. Marcellus is constrained. Haynesville, there's only so much they can do there. A lot of areas in the country, there's not much room for a lot of growth. And what they did is they're actually adding 4.6 BCFD per day to the Waha system by the end of next year, and another 2.8 coming on. So basically all the problems we've had in the past are hopefully going to go away and make this a much better place to go. Again, one thing is what the projected increase by the EIA is saying, really in 26, we're only looking at about a 0.2 BCF increase. Now, if you're looking at the LNG coming on the Gulf Coast and data centers coming on, you have to have incremental gas for that. These are new sources in addition to what we're powering right now, and incremental coming out of the Permian, which is where everybody's starting to say this is where we're going to get it from, is pretty skinny. So I don't think anybody's really put this on the radar yet, but it's definitely, at least if you do the math, it's cause for concern. And again, the problem in the past, when the pipelines filled up, you got a highly unstable revenue stream. It's made it real difficult to raise capital. I mean, it's been a good tax write-off, but that's about it. And usually when investors come in, they want to get either cash flow, asset appreciation, or both. And so far, with anything connected to Waha, it's been pretty much a money disposal system so far. And again, since 2008, there's really almost zero drilling activity in gas plays in Texas and really pretty much anywhere. Gas rigs are pretty much shut down since then. And again, almost 100% of the gas that's filling up Waha now is associated with oil production. So again, this is poised to change in a big way, because we've got some serious increases in demand coming, and being able to keep up is going to be more of a challenge than trying to figure out how to make these economic. And then gas could have superior economics to oil again. It did at one time back in the past. Certainly did in Canada. It was a much preferred commodity up there for a long time. But it's got the potential to really boom here. Again, it could be the new $70 oil that everybody's hoping for. Everybody's saying we can't live with $50 or $60 oil, and we need 70 or more. Well, if gas does what it should do with the math involved here, it could very well offset that concern, because lower prices are basically on the horizon. Most operators are seeing, they're adjusting their budgets, they're adjusting their personnel to deal with lower prices, and this could help. Again, a major source in the Permian for gas could be the Ozona and Sonora fields. There's several other ones out there. These are the major ones. There's over 10,000 total wells. And it's fully drilled up. I mean, you've got 40-acre spacing, you can't really infill development hasn't really worked. So it's, you're stuck. You don't have any way to drill new wells. There's really no horizontal potential, or minimal horizontal potential. So, and really, basically, the ability to get the gas to Waha, these wells were making probably 10 times the production they're making now early on. So you've got a lot of room for expansion to get the gas out of these fields to Waha. But what's been limited has been the actual transport capacity of Waha to the Gulf. And that's why these have pretty much become a series of problems rather than solutions. And so recompletions is our deal, and this was actually the first recompletion project I was involved in. We bought into this field back in 2012, and basically we looked at 10,000 production decline curves in both fields, and we just didn't see any increases in production. And the reason for that we're going to talk about here is it's primarily because of the formation damage issues that people haven't really dealt with very well. We tried 4 different types of water-based refracts, and basically we had 0 success rate, very low results on that. And new wells at virgin pressure, sometimes there's less invasion and you got a little bit less damage. You're still severely damaging these rocks, though. And then the lower pressures now make that damage even worse. So it's, you've still got plenty of pressure to give you economic results, but it gives you a lot of invasion problems. And this is where the petrophysics come in. We're clearly in a sub-irreducible water saturated rock, and there's a lot of these around the world. And that's where the majority of the oil-based fracks in Canada are occurring in these rocks. You have irreducible bulk volume water. So if you have 10% porosity or you have 50% irreducible saturation, these wells are currently like 20 to 30. So as soon as you add water to that, it goes to irreducible, and that it's a fourth power permeability relationship. Your perm drops off by an order of magnitude at least. And we'll show you an example coming up where it was almost 2 orders of magnitude reduction. Again, this one well we did in Ukraine, we'll show you had a 2 order magnitude reduction on that using water-based fluids. Here's where the fields are. They're pretty large. Those are the red areas. On the left is Ozona, right Sonora. Say over 10,000 total wells, about 8,500 currently active. Very low production rate. 7 MCF a day is not really, and that means half the wells are above that, half the wells are below that. That's pretty low. That's hard to really raise the needle on trying to get these LNG plants fed or the data centers fed. So something's got to be done. And here's the case from Ukraine, which basically it's the identical type of situation we have here. We did we got a pretty good permeability from the buildup, from undamaged. The SWI is about 30 down to about 0.232 using rail perms. We had a DFIT that showed it was 0.08 millidarcies, and then we did a production match that showed they got about 500 MCF a day out of a well that should have made about 50 million a day. And so this is an extreme case. We're not really looking at this level of severe under irreducible saturation, but nonetheless, it shows you what the basic concept is. You're damaging the rock with water, and when you refract it, you damage it even worse. And we tried that 4 times, and we didn't get any results out of it. Here's what's going on in the cartoon. If you mix water with water, you're going to get this type of profile here. And then what you get at the end of the day is a severely damaged. You got capillary phase trapping when you go back to irreducible saturation. With oil-based fluids, you're going into water-based rocks, so you pretty much get 100% of your load back unless it gets trapped somehow down between shale layers or something. You're going to get it all back because you're basically putting oil and water together, and it repels it. So, what we're looking at as far as the effective frac length, we projects in these other 2 areas and saw about the same thing. And then we did a frac well down south. 5% of the frac length produced 75. It's really, there's a lot of gas. Our wells average about 1.1 BCF recoverable on each 40-acre well. But until we get the price back, we can't really do anything with them. So there's the numbers there I just talked about. We're pretty good economics on this. Again, these are pretty much liabilities right now until we get them going. And then, basically we talked about the pricing volatility. Basically once the first of the 3 pipes open, we should be more than able to meet that demand. And so it should be open season now to get gas out of the Permian. And then basically, hopefully the stability will continue till well after the wells pay out. It's been a real up and down deal right now over the last few years. Sometimes we can sell our gas, sometimes we can't. And investors don't get too enthusiastic about that, like I said. So hopefully the demand coming up and the ability to supply it here is going to help get a lot of inactive wells off the board. We're planning on using Y-grade or mineral oil. It's kind of different type of situation. Hasn't really been used specifically in this area yet, but it's used quite a bit in Canada. Or Y-grade mineral oil is used in other areas for fracking conventionally, but we're looking to use fly ash without any kind of gel or friction reducer. It's combining 2 technologies that have not really been combined before, but I have not heard anybody explain why it won't work. You can say, I want to see something, I want to see it work before I put money into it, or you can also say, tell me why it won't work. And so far, I haven't heard any valid objections to it. So at any rate, that's my explorationist attitude. But again, we're looking at pumping 325 mesh fly ash, 5,000 pounds per foot of vertical pay. And then Y grade up to 4 pounds per gallon. We've got the vendor that's going to be pumping this has done a lot of simulations on this and says we can even 0.25 to 0.5 centipoise fluid, you can still get, that volume of fly ash away. It's basically like a liquid. It goes in like a liquid. It doesn't really act like a propellant when you're pumping it. And then we can use mineral oil if it's some issues with Y grade, but it's about 3x the cost. Y grade is about $30 a barrel, and your mineral oil is about $130 a barrel. So, but you get about 190% of your load back. So you're really not buying the fluid like you are with a frac fluid, like water base. You're really just renting it, and you can get it back, put it on another well, or you can sell it back to the purchaser. We're going to be using this fly ash treatment. Superior Energy Services have picked this up. They just recently purchased 2025. It's a patent through the University of Kentucky on this. We've done now. It's been highly successful. Very good results on it. It's about $1,000 a ton, whereas this one. Here's the economics on there. Again, if we get the recovery factors we think we're going to get, these numbers work all day long. I mean, these are basically wells that are currently uneconomic, and they have potential with the addition of a little capital and the addition of a little technology to actually be highly profitable producing assets. That's why we've been holding on to this field for so long. It's waiting for this day when we can finally sell our gas again, and I think that day is coming. And it's not just the canyon. I mean, you've got other areas. I mean, you got all these areas. Red Fork's a big one. Marl's a big one. A lot of these are severely below irreducible. Cotton Valley, Travis Peak, not so much. Vicksburg, slightly. I don't see a huge market down here for the oil base, but really these three areas are huge markets for oil-based fracs because you have a lot of formation damage taking place in both of these. So, and then we showed in the Red Fork, CO2 foams outperform, water-based, significantly, and so we've seen that. But any rate, so it's not just here, And the other thing is, if you're going to, where the data center location is the main thing. LNG is going to go down the pipeline to the coast, but data center, basically, you can actually, there's a possibility that you can actually get close to your data centers with some of these sources. Maybe not so much the Ozona since it's out in the middle of nowhere, but some of these other areas where you might be able to get a data center in there. Okay, hopefully you've seen that you can effectively turn inactive wells to economic production and significantly improve low producing rate active wells. It's a valid technique for trying to keep wells off the P&A list. Again, we compete with Tier 1 in the Eagle Ford. Everybody's going out to buy wells. All you're doing is changing ownership. You're not really improving. You're adding value to the industry. You're adding value to your own pocketbook, but you're really not adding value to the industry, where this actually grows production organically. And also the vertical gas wells in like Ozona, Sonora, and really any other place in the Morrow and the Red Fork, any of these tight gas plays that have water sensitivity issues. Once this oil-based refrac catches on, basically you're going to see a lot of ability to try and fill the gaps that we're going to see. Because right now, I mean, Permian is not really, the growth in the Permian has slowed quite a bit, and so it's like say 2.2 BCF a day is what we're looking at this year, which is down from, it was as high as a BCF and a half, almost 2 BCF a while back a day. But you were seeing growth in every year. 2 years ago, it was 1.5 BCF a day. So it's been growing quite a bit and filling the pipelines. But I think we've got the point where we're reaching a critical mass on the pipelines there to meet these needs. And so Waha's got the potential, just Waha alone, it's got the potential to keep the industry wheels turning, and there's a lot of areas. In fact, the other area out in Culberson County, it's all gas. I mean, it's very close in the oil window there, but it's not even talking about that stuff. So you've got a lot of potential out there to turn imminent P&A candidates into P1 producing reserves. And again, this is our plan going forward, to try and keep converting P&A candidates to P1 reserves, and that's kind of our story. And open it up for any questions.
Thank you, Bob. Very, very good. Bob, hang on a minute. Is that really your license plate?
10-4.
Yeah, that's good. That's very, very funny and good. Interesting. Absolutely. Oh, that was a fantastic talk. Thank you very much, Bob. Lots of information there. Has anyone online got any questions for Bob or any comments? I have a question, but I'd rather see who else first. I'm not, just check the chat here. Any questions? All right, I'll ask a question while we're waiting to see if there's any more questions. So my question, Bob, was, I mean, that sounds really good. I think that, really interesting. I mean, the concept, obviously, as you say, to get more value, these wells have already been drilled. There's much less effort to either recomplete or refrac, either one way or the other. You're getting more out without as much carbon footprint of drilling a new well. But I'm wondering, and obviously you saw my presentation, so you can imagine an angle I might come from would be, I wonder what the integrity risks might be to old casing strings when you subject them to these new either refrac or completions. Presumably, there's high pressures involved. So have you got any idea on, do you experience problems with old well components or casing strings, or are you selecting wells where that won't be the case?
You typically, Aaron, when you like I say, you don't go out and just do these the next day. You prepare the well, you go in and clean it out. Then you also run what they call a dark vision tool, which is a high resolution ultrasonic tool that can get really micromillimeter resolution. You can see casing defects, because one of the issues we look at big time is when you run a liner in these wells, a mechanic, you don't run casing all the way back to surface when you do a refrac on a 15,000 foot TBD well. You'll run the 5,000 foot liner down there and have it hung off, but where you set that liner top needs to be above any kind of defects in the casing that have the potential. And you can measure the thickness of the casing, you can measure the integrity of the casing, and 100% of the operators are doing that now, where they make sure that you won't have any failures in the existing string, because you're putting pressure on the existing string above the liner, and you want to make sure that there's no problems there. And if you did have a failure, typically it's going to be downhole. It's not going to be near the surface anyway. I mean, you've got two strings on most of these wells, down to 4,000 or 5,000, almost a mile down on most of these wells. So you've got already a second barrier on there. If the internal barrier fails, you've got a backup barrier, and sometimes three barriers depending on your surface string. And so any kind of failure in the mechanically is going to take place downhole, or it could take place on an offset well. If you don't refrac the parent well, and when you frac child wells, they have had issues where you've had casing damage on parent wells if they're not protected. So there is some issues there, but again, it's you're 2 miles in the ground in the Eagle Ford, so it's not really anything that's going to cause a leak at the surface. It'd be pretty hard to get it to come to the surface, even if you wanted to. No.
All right. Yeah, that's good to understand that, Bob. See, I mean, obviously it's a careful site selection, well selection, careful due diligence beforehand, and as long as that's done, it should be fine. So yeah, no, that's really interesting. All right. Well, thanks very much, Bob. I've got one more question here online from Yasin. So the question is about the legal side of ownership and operatorship. Do you hold the lease and operate the wells yourselves, or do you lease or assign operatorship to another party? What legal framework enables your investment?
Well, the answer to that question is yes. we do both. On the consulting side, we have a non-operated interest, and on the operating side, we own 100% of the wells. So it's the Eagle Ford. We have an interest in the wells production, but in the canyon, we own the wells 100%.
All right, that's good. All right, well, thank you very much. We'll have a few minutes for some more questions at the very end, but we'll stop there. And thanks again, Bob, for that excellent presentation. Okay. And now we'll move on to the last, but certainly not least, talk today from Elena. So Elena, are you ready to share your screen?
Yes, let me do that right now.
Please do, and I shall introduce you, Elena. So thank you very much indeed again for your contributions. That's really good to see these slightly different talks looking at these different angles of old infrastructure. And we're really pleased to have Elena Garcia with us, who's the Managing Senior Vice President at Ryder Scott, Head of the Sustainable Energy Division. Elena has also a long and distinguished career, so highly regarded reservoir engineer, 25 years of experience specializing in carbon capture and utilization and storage, greenhouse gas quantification and verification, reserve evaluation, enhanced oil recovery. So the full suite there. And as the Managing Senior Vice President and Head of Ryder Scott's Sustainable Energy Division, Elena leads global initiatives in CCUS, feasibility and regulatory and standards compliance. So fantastic to be able to get an insight into your work and long career, Elena. And you're going to talk about, I believe, practical measurement-led approach to abating emissions in oil and gas operations. So this is something I'm massively interested in for sure. Prioritizing near-term wins, rapid leak detection and repair, capturing routine tank vapors and driving routine flaring towards zero, backed up by repair clock and verifiable closeouts. And I think you're going to give us a really nice case study demonstrating measurable reductions and more gas to sales with low capital with quick payback. So very keen to hear all about it, Elena. Why don't you, I can see your slides there. Why don't you take it away? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you for a nice introduction. And thank you for everyone here for taking the time to learn and attend to these webinars and learn more about what can we do to reduce emissions in wells and operations in general. So my presentation is not going to be only about wells, it's emission reduction in oil and gas infrastructure. It's going to be a broader term. So I'm going to walk you through practical pathways for reducing emissions in the upstream oil and gas. This approach that I'm taking is going to prioritize near-term wins, like what can you do first in order to reduce the most emissions and get verifiable results and also lasting results. So I'll show you how simple operating controls can prevent vents, can prevent methane slips and fugitive emissions. And finally, at the end, I'm going to share a brief case study demonstrating how measurable reductions can be applied in companies to reduce emissions, to improve profitability of business, and also increase gas sales. Because that also affects the industry. So let me start with the first slide here, and then I'll take the questions at the end, but if anybody have any questions in the middle, feel free to interrupt. All right, so let me start by framing why emission management has become so critical for oil and gas companies. So on the business side, it's pretty much affecting the license to operate. So in later years, we've seen more investors and policy pressure towards company, trying to get companies and oil and gas operators to reduce their emissions. So customers also are demanding low carbon supply, and that now emissions because of fugitive or venting emissions, and I'll get to that in a minute, it's not necessarily an exclusive environmental issue anymore. It's become a loss of revenue because most of the gas that is lost could be pretty much sold in the market. So capturing that gas and not venting it or not putting it into the atmosphere can actually improve the margins in many companies, in all companies actually. So a lot of changes, we've seen a lot of changes since 2020. So, for example, we have the Oil and Gas Methane Partnership, which is a UN-led commitment that is being led by the United Nations, and now commits operators to measure methane and measure their routine flaring instead of estimating them. So we're going from estimation of emissions using random and sometimes very global emission factors to actually measuring the emission to get more accuracy in the estimation. So where companies are now using optic gas, imaging, continuous sensor, even satellites. So, and they are also targeting or sequencing their emissions based on what is most important for them. And effective management, what does that deliver right now? So in order to have an effective management, that means that right now they need to deliver emission reductions right now, not in years, not in months, but right now. And that is where the net saving opportunities are. So companies right now are creating the whole emission tackling operation based on ISO, which is an amazing standard. It's also very strict. That's being applied company-wide in many organizations, in many operations. So that way they have a measurement, reporting and verification report that also leaves an audit trail so we can see how they're doing the operation, how they're conducting their emission, how they are documenting everything, and it's actually defended. Because many of these operations are also being done for credits, for carbon credits. So it's also very good to have and recommended to have an audit trail of all these incentives. All right, so key strategies for emission reduction abatements. So let's put the pieces on the table. We have, first of all, fugitive emissions. That's the highest impact short-term lever in the oil and gas. Those are emissions that happen by accident. So you can include the orphan wells or the zombie wells that are not familiar with the zombie wells, but it sounds very scary. You can throw those in there, in the fugitive emission. There are emissions that are done unintentionally. They happen unintentionally. They're things that leaks, flanges and equipment that leaks by accident, and it happens in all industry. So next we have flaring, eliminating flaring, or maybe it's only using or eliminating a non-emergency flaring also capture a lot of emissions and is also a very meaningful reduction emission strategy. Followed by electrification where it's possible, where it fits. It also reduced emissions because many companies have, for example, ESP pumps in their wells, and they use gas. So if they could be electrified, it is possible, it's feasible, and it makes sense economically. That is another option that they have. Carbon capture and sequestration is also part of the technology tool. It's not for everyone. It's very much recommended for hard to abate sectors like the cement, steel, but it's also part of the toolkit that companies have. Energy efficiency, everything that can do to reduce emissions within their own operations is also another option. Integrating renewables, also where it fits, it is as a complement of all the other strategies. It's also very recommended. And lastly, innovative technologies. Right now, we have satellite, we have artificial intelligence, we have digital, and those together make very good monitoring and assurance. So it's very critical to sometimes not necessarily pick and choose, but see what makes more sense for the company based on their emissions that they have. And I walk through the process in future slides. So this is the view that is shown by the International Energy, and what costs the most, in their view, what costs the most emissions by 2030, and what it costs to get there. So in the left and the green, let me change my pointer here. So in the left here, we see the emission reductions by 2030. So it's led by methane. They don't specify what type of emission. I'm assuming it is either venting or fugitive because they have flaring on the second choice, right? So then they have flaring, which is all the methane that you see burning in refineries, in gas plants, etc. So that's another lever that is important and that could cut a lot of emission. Followed by electrification, like I just explained, CCUS, and very close, followed by a hydrogen, but with a more modest share. So on the right, we see the cost and we see the savings to 2030. And again, we see that methane emission reduction are largely low cost and net saving, especially when you credit or you take into account all the savings when you recover part of the gas and sell it. So that's part of the efficiency and the operations I'm talking about. Electrification is the big next ticket item, reflecting power upgrades and outside conversion that sometimes is possible for some companies. And then again, carbon capture and sequestration, not for everyone, but it's also part of the tool. And hydrogen is most modest in this period. So the takeaway of this, this strategy aligns with the roadmap that I'm going to show you later. We can, based on this, and this is a good example, show you the roadmap of what the steps that we need to follow. Based on this, we need to do methane first, because that's the one that allows us to tackle the most amount of emissions, and then we tackle flaring later, because they will have also a high impact on the operation, and pretty much often they pay for themselves, because we capture that methane and then we put it on the pipeline where it belongs instead of venting it. And then we can stage electrification and CCUS and other more fancy technologies where it makes sense. Most likely for more concentrated streams and other sites where the when they can add more durable value, especially if they have incentive like they have here, the 45Q. So the second emissions that I'm talking about is fugitive and venting. Fugitives are those unintended leaks that happens in valves, in flanges, in seals, in fittings, orphan wells or zombie wells, also an example of fugitive emission. Everything that is unintended is considered, according to the EPA, fugitive emissions. So those are also long-hanging fruit that companies can attack. And they're usually not that very expensive. Venting are largely associated with operations. So tank losses, blow down, loading and unloading. So the plan is to do the venting as minimal as possible. So that's also is going to reduce the emissions. So in the end, companies have to design the operation to reduce emission by fixing all the leaks in the case of venting and reducing all the venting or eliminating them altogether. So, and then we'll manage that with KPIs, with also establishing some threshold like leak rate. So above this leak rate, you know, there's an alarm, and then they have to submit a work order to fix it. And then they have to estimate how much methane was leaked, and then combine all that into their own KPI operation. Also, they have to document what is the recurrence, what was the percent of that CO2, sorry, of that methane that was captured, and at the end they will use that information to calculate the methane intensity of the operation. Flaring is a big one in the oil and gas industry. It's the second largest near-term opportunity after methane emissions. So the message here is simple. Most routine flaring isn't inevitable. So roughly 2/3 of flaring can be abated at no net cost if you take into account all the saved gas, because the cost of the gas, or the price of the gas is higher than the fixing. So it created the value of the saved gas. So you treat flares as a safety devices, not as process steps. So sometimes flaring has to happen because of safety reasons, and we understand that, but we need to work towards eliminating the non-emergency flare altogether. So the playbook is capture that CO2, fund cells tie in where it fits, and only do it for temporary storage during outages, only when it's necessary. So it's better to conduct this operation in this way, because that will not only reduce the carbon intensity of the operations in general, but also will keep them more safe. Lastly, or almost lastly, I think I have one more after this to talk about the toolkits that we have. Carbon capture and sequestration. I do a lot of carbon capture and sequestration analysis, evaluation, risk registers, and due diligence and RADSCOT. And again, it's not for every company because it's very capital intensive, but it also presents a good solution for reducing emissions, especially if you have, for example, a gas that produces high content of CO2. That CO2 can be stripped out of the methane or the natural gas and can be reinjected in another reservoir for CO2 EUR, or can be injected in a saline aquifer for permanent CO2 storage. So there are options, not necessarily that CO2 has to be emitted. So CCUS, again, in the United States, we have 45Q. It is a great incentive. Many companies are using more and more CCUS for geological storage, like dedicated CO2 storage, and also since the credit was increased recently to $85 a ton, many operators are also, and project developers are also looking at more CO2 injection into CO2 EOR field. So that's another opportunity. Electrification, as I mentioned before, where it's feasible. The near targets, so the big targets will be fields that are near to a grid, or they have a strong wind and solar energy creation. So those are the ones that likely companies will want to do first. Sometimes sites where electrification enables zero bleed, so they have pneumatics that use they emit or vent methane when they are in operation. So they wanted to electrify those to avoid that. So that's another opportunity that the companies could use. Also, integrating renewables never hurts. It's a great way to reduce the carbon footprint in oil and gas infrastructure, is to integrate renewable wherever is possible. Renewable, again, is not for everyone, not all companies on all operations as that possibility to add renewables, but more and more we're seeing that that it's being integrated more effectively into operations. And where do we see it? For example, installation of solar photovoltaic and battery energy storage system for water handling operations, and also an ESP wells. When you have hundreds of thousands of wells that are on ESP, you maybe want to electrify them using renewables. So this is another option. Again, they are more effective when they are already when we have a steady electrical load, like compression, water handling, ESP farms, and the simple path is solar plus battery. Then you could have more coverage of an energy for the operation. So that's another option right there. And there are many examples in the oil and gas industry where they are integrating renewable. For example, Equinor is doing it in Norway, offshore. PDO is doing it in Oman. They're using solar thermal generated steam for EOR. For EOR to displace natural gas. ExxonMobil is doing in the Permian. So many other companies are using it. So it's possible. Lastly, embracing innovative technology. Perhaps the most important thing that you should take advantage of whenever possible is the innovation and technology. Oftentimes, people like to stick to what has worked for them in the past, but exploring new opportunities, new options, new technologies can be a game changer for some companies. So digital tools, artificial intelligence, sometimes now we're seeing satellite data like this one. This is for methane sat. It's amazing what they can do. They can really scan the entire area and give you qualitatively visualization of where the leaks are. Is very useful. Companies, again, are using that in combination with more near practical close to ground technologies. So predictive operation, remote leak detections like that, and any type of monitoring operations are being used right now, and are also being incentivized because in some countries, for example, there are penalties if you emit more than you are allowed to. So the satellites and this type of technology are very useful for them. So now I'm going to get into the case study. This is an actual client of ours who came to us at the end of last year and asked us, how can we do to improve our emission situation? Give us a roadmap on how we can reduce emission and stick to the Oil and Gas Methane Partnership 2.0. As I said, it is an organization that is led by the United Nations and have a clear guideline on how companies should take into account their emission reduction plan, pretty much geared to methane. So let me get into that. Okay, this is the methane roadmap aligned with the Oil and Gas Methane Partnership. This is more or less what we designed for them, following the OGMP guidelines. So again, this is a United Nations-led industry framework for methane management and also for reporting. Governments, NGOs, and many other organizations are using it as the gold standard for quantification and for reporting and how they should go about reducing their emissions. So this OGMP framework raises the bar. in terms of estimate, because before, as I mentioned before, companies were used they're used to use emission factors, maybe not so accurate to determine their emission. Using the oil and gas methane partnership guideline, they actually are forced to measure their emissions. So the measurement has to be like science-based and has to be reported at source level. So it asks company, for example, map all the methane sources across the assets and use the best method available for measuring that emission. So, for example, in this case, for this client, they have 5 major components for the emission: fugitive, combustion, flaring, and tanks operation, which is related to venting. So you can see here, most of the emissions in their operation were related to venting, like 50%. So since it was a very important component, we divided into prevention, how you prevent it, and how you mitigate it when it happens. And then we list all the technologies that could be deployed in the field right away to reduce that, to attack that. And then we do the same for the other emission sources, flaring, combustion, fugitive, etc. And then we divide that by different technologies and the readiness of that technology. And then we deploy that in time using pilots and testing, verification, the effectiveness, and then using KPIs to make sure they're actually working, and then scaling them up to other areas if they actually work. So in this particular example, first we need to know where the emissions are coming from. So what are the sources of the emissions and what are the biggest culprit? For this particular company, the tanker operations was the biggest offender. Like the tanker is when you have the oil in tanks, the oil, because the components of the oil are not very stable, and then the gases and the lighter components, tend to vent, to rise, and they do it for safety reasons, because they want all the gas to leave the tank to make it less volatile, I guess. So that's bad design. So in this case, tanker operation was the largest emission source, followed by by flaring, and then combustion and fugitive. So what you see on the left is just the split for all the sources, and on the right we have ranked the abatement technologies by relative methane impact. So this is when you get a problem like this is the first thing you do. What are the emission sources? And based on the technologies that I have, what are the abatement technologies that I have available for it, and how I'm going to use it in terms of the impact. So on the right, we have run the abatement technologies relative to the impact, and at the top, we have the heavy hitters like tanker operation and vapor recovery units. And then as we go down, we can see other technologies that have an impact, but not as much as the one on top. So now that we're seeing where the methane comes from, now we need to see how much it costs to implement them of the field, because those technology implementation, they are not necessarily cheap. So this chart ranks option by deployment cost in dollar per 1,000 of MCF, I think, or cubic feet of abated gas. So lower is on the top, and higher is on the bottom. So quick low complexity closures sit at the very top, like gasket, wraps, seals to address the fugitive emission. And then also we have assisted flare under $1 per NCF. They are fast to implement and they're easy to verify. Next, we have projects that are around 1 to 3 MCF. And then we have vapor recovery units, and then we have software, because we need software to monitor and to send alarms and messages to operators when something is going on. And then this typically deliver strong paybacks where vapors are consistent. So this is or where they can shorten the leak, the duration of the leak. So mid-range, we have solutions around $5 per NCF, like RTO or regenerative thermal oxidation for steady vent streams. And also we have high efficiency burners and also plugging wells. So P&A operations show $6.3 per MCF. However, it can be lower if we take into or we remove the rig availability and remobilization out of the cost estimate. Higher on these assets, gas to power, for example, pretty much used for crypto. For crypto purposes, and also combustion selected catalytic reduction, SCR, are around $10 per NCF. So you can see how the cost is deployed and how is the cost of technology in all these options. Now let's ask the final question. Which options can actually earn the best return on capital? So this chart ranks abatement options by return on capital employed for this asset. So the standouts are the capital like fixes, like gaskets, about 12.5, right? And then because they stop chronic leaks with minimal spend, so you have the best return there. And then you have wraps and seal followed at 4.1. So you can see, you can see the message, how the capital return on capital employed changes depending on the technology used. So VRU, like vapor recovery unit for tank operations show a positive 1.4 there in the third bar, and then you can see how it works. So let me walk you through how to use this slide. On the left, we can see all the main methane sources: combustion, flaring, tanker loading, fugitive, and the solution that address each one of these emission sources. So for example, combustion, we address it with multiple applications, including software and sensor. And the flaring, you can see we have vapor recovery units and gas to cryptocurrency, etc. So you can see that. And then on the right, we have the technology relevant level. This is and then it's mapped or is plotted against relative cost. So you can see, where the bigger win is, right? Like you have something that is low cost, but the technology is not ready. And then you can see, for example, here, the technology is high, but the cost is also high. So it's a way for you to get an idea what works and what doesn't work, right? And then the bubbles show the technology readiness based on relative to the cost of volume of MCF that is being abated. So the higher TRL, low cost items are quick wins. You have that higher technology readiness and cost little, so that's pretty much what we want. So, and then in the bottom, we have this bottom row, you have all the solutions or pilots so we want to implement in this project. And then you'll see in the followed slides that will show all these technologies will be deployed in stages so that we can get the best results. So we can use technology that we know it works at the beginning to tackle or to abate the most methane at the beginning as possible. And then we monitor later to see how that technology worked. And then we see we can scale it to other assets, or in the same field, we can scale it in a more broader sense. And we monitor how we're doing. That's pretty much following the oil and gas methane partnership guideline. Okay, so in general, this is the technology maturity roadmap that we follow. Year 0, which is for this project was 2025. Is measure and baseline. We measure where we are, because in order to know, if we are implementing an actual reduction, we need to measure the baseline. This is where we are today. So we have to measure and define the uncertainty in all those measurements. Year 1 is when we deploy pilots, depending on different emission types. There will be different pilots deployed in different parts of the operations. Then we perform, we check the performance in terms of how much is working in emission terms, how much MCS is being abated, and also how efficient it is in terms of dollar per ton. Okay, year 3, we standardize to see if it works, and then we can analyze if that's a technology that is worthwhile implementing the rest of the area. Year 4, scale deployment, roll out across sites, automate using KPIs to determine how it's working, and then reporting the cadence, how frequently we're going to deploy, how many years or how many months we're going to deploy all the technology across. Year 5, following ISO, of course, we need to do continuous improvement. How is this working? Is this working as intended? We need to do changes. Any corrective action is just like doing an audit on your own work. So then I'm going to show you, for example, this is the roadmap for flaring. On flaring, as I mentioned before, we're shifting the mindset from acceptable routine to emergency only. So we're only recommending, or actually we're mandating flaring only for emergency situations. The practical path is just capture that gas and control the flaring only when it's for emergency. So think of this as a flaring playbook over 5 years. So in 2025, we start with measurement, getting real data on gas flow, composition, actual destruction efficiency, etc. Then we use technology like inline gas chromatography, and then we add software layer so we can have evidence in real time of how everything is behaving, so we can have a pattern that is clean and repeatable across the asset. Now with the data, in next year or year 2, 2026, in this case, it's all about action. We launch abatement pilots where they fit like vapor recovery units on tanks, gas to power on crypto. Where tie-ins are feasible, we can do the gas to power. If not, we can create a tie-in to capture the gas instead of venting it, instead of flaring it. So we're doing things that are practical, and we integrate software so detection closes straight into a work order instead of going to a static spreadsheet. So by 2027, those pilots have run long enough to validate two things. One is efficiency, and one is return on capital. How much is it working well, and how much is costing us? So we scaled the measurement technology that proved positive and effective, and then we can add assisted flare or adding additional regenerative thermal oxidizer pilots if it's justified. 2028, which is year 3, because 2025 was year 0, we can finish the pilot and then see how it worked, and then we keep deploying the measurement layer across other assets because we really cannot manage what we don't measure. So we need to see in that particular year how things are working. 2029 is scale. It's all about scale. So we roll out all those technologies that hit that return on capital employed hurdle, and verify that the performance holds at fleet level. So we also watch emerging technologies because you also have to keep an eye on what is out there that can also help. And every year technology changes, and we see better and bigger things that are actually are worth implementing in fields if it's cost permit. By 2030, we are at target flaring reduction with continuous improvement in the area. With the key message here is discipline. Measure first, get your baseline, pilot with stage gates where it makes sense, validate returns, and then scale if the technology is working. Same roadmap for combustion is the same path. Incomplete combustion in a oil and gas operator is a killer, and it adds up. So we are looking at heaters, boilers, engines, and turbines that can sleep when they're out of tune, or they're running on pure fuel, or cycling too often. So we're looking at that. And the fix here is very operational, schedule tuning, maintenance, better air fuel control, and avoiding unnecessary short cycling. So pair that with performance checks, maintenance, and then we'll see a drop in CO2 equivalent emission, along with smoother operation and fewer call-outs. So if you follow the timeline, is pretty much the same that I followed before. So by, for example, 2028, we finish the pilot. We deploy with clear economics. 29 and 2030, we track all the key performance operation indicators like fuel rate, methane, and CO2 slip, the uptime, and we keep tuning and assessing emergency options if necessary. So the net message is tune and automate first, upgrade where is needed, because it pays off, and use the technology also as they become available. This is the timeline of the roadmap for venting. Tank loading is very small per event, but adds up very fast over the year. Actually, for this particular client, that was one of their largest emissions. So in 2025 or year zero, we diagnosed the root cause of venting, how much methane is entrained, and when it's being leaked. We use inline chromatograph for composition, inline vapor pressure sensors. We also have a software layer, so reading becomes alert and work orders. Again, not just static spreadsheet. 2026, we move to abatement using pilots, vapor recovery unit to capture vapors at the tanks where streams are mixed. You know, all the technologies. By 2027, we're integrating sensors, pressure, temperature, flows, chromatograph, vapor pressure units, etc. By the end of the roadmap, by year 5, 29, 2030, we track standardized emission metrics, validate performance at scale, and keep scanning emergency technology while we run continuous improvement loop. So next one is fugitive. Again, these are accidental, unintended emissions. We start by mapping the problem and then looking fixes that shorten the leak duration and prevent it from coming back. So 2025 of year zero is about standing up the program. We baseline leaks from process as well as well operation and deploy measurements like infrared on drones, permanent sensors. And so we're finding the bit heaters fast and with evidence. In 2026, we move to immediate fix pilots and project operation. We test some technologies like self-healing sealants on casing joints and flanges and valve seats, and tie the work to software detection. So again, the work orders become more automatic and with closure. Closure with photos, evidence that actually the leak was fixed. In wet operation, we pilot specialty plugs for P&A in the wells and tackle sustained casing pressure with well leaking loadings with a vapor recovery unit where capture is feasible. 2027, we have completed the first abatement pilot, and then we add specialty wraps for piping leaks, targeting spots where clamps and sealants alone don't hold. 2028 is decision time. We finish testing all the pilots and select the long-term gasket solutions like spiral wounds or other gasket, graphite composite, other technologies. We incorporate all the successful measures into the well operating procedure, so they become the default, no exception. 2029, we push further with smart seals, with more sensors, and we'll continue improving on well operation. 2030, we expect to be a target reduction with a continuous improvement loop, a standard kit for quick fixes, and assessing again new technologies. Their overall methane abatement looks like this. This slide is an integrated picture. When you combine super emitter responses, pneumatic conversion, tank controls, and a disciplined close out, you don't get incremental reduction. You change the slope of the emission curve. So the program becomes repeatable. The cost per ton is attractive for this project, for this plan. And the claims are defensible. So all these abatement strategies could be very well used for carbon credits if they wanted to. So that was built, that what builds defensible and confidence emission abatement program with that is going to fit very well with lenders, with customer, and with regulators. Let's see, and again, it follows the same pattern. In 2025, we run measurements. 2026, we launch abatement pilots. 2027, we scale up. 2029, 28, 29, we validate a field scale. By 2030, we expect to hit the methane reduction targets, keep the continuous improvement loop, running and maintain a lane with new technologies. This is a world methane abatement. I don't want to go over time, but this is more or less what I see that is going in a global context. The direction of travel is clear. The market is rewarding operators who can show measure methane intensity improvements and credible verification. That's why I always emphasize that ISO standards, especially the 14064 parts 1, 2, 3 are very important. Following that will give them a credible carbon credits claims for either for validation or verification process purposes. It also means that technologies and practice are converging. And then if we anchor a progress in measurement and repeatable practices, we can scale results across different assets and different geographies. Final remark based on the project I presented, or the roadmap I presented, is very simple playbook. We need to measure first, create the baseline, and then manage. We set a clear baseline and then keep an evidence trail, so every reduction is verifiable. Then we prioritize the impact and cost. We need to go after the biggest offenders and the cheapest ton first, and sequence longer lead solutions behind them. We pilot, we learn, and then we scale. We time box all these solutions with success criteria, and then we roll it out where is needed. They have to make sure that they meet all the thresholds for acceptances and efficiency within the operation. That means that a standard workflow from detection to work order to repair and verify close out has to be fitting into an inventory. So it's a long list there. So basically, this is want to summarize saying that this is how we turn commitments into durable, auditable results. I'm an auditor myself. I've audited reserves for 15 years now, and also I'm wearing the ISO audit hat when I do verifications and validation evaluations for emission reduction strategy. So I'm very excited about the time that is coming that will allow us to measure the emissions in a way that is verifiable and following scientific and science-based approach. So with that, I will close. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Marilena. I'm Xuejia. You can also call me Morgan. I'm Dr. Decker's postdoc. I'm the co-host today. Dr. Aaron has to leave, and many thanks for your wonderful presentation. And we are taking questions from the chat. The first one is from Yasin. He said, "Hi, Marilena. It was wonderful seeing you again after 22 years from TAMU. Given hydrogen's very small molecular size and the associated leakage and storage challenges, do you think hydrogen can still play a major role in the energy transition?"
Well, yes. The things with hydrogen is cost. In theory, it works very well. But the problem with hydrogen, especially green hydrogen, and what has prevented the rollout of that technology is the cost. I worked on several projects doing green and blue hydrogen, especially in Europe. And again, if you have the incentive, especially for blue hydrogen, it's going to work. However, green, the cost of deployment of that technology is still, I guess, it's not going to happen in the near term because, again, the cost is actually prohibited. So, yeah, it's in the future, it's in the pipeline, but it's not going to happen anytime soon, unfortunately.
Thank you. Is there any more question?
And yeah.
Yes.
No, I don't see so. I don't think so. Well, Justin, was nice to hear from you after 2 years. That was a long time ago.
Okay, that's good. Okay, okay, well, thank you, Marilena, for giving such good presentation, and many thanks to Bob. And we really appreciate that you take your time and give us a talk regarding the legacy well or methane emission. And we hope to looking forward to collaborate with you again. On the behalf of Dr. Ganesh Thakur from University of Houston and Dr. Aaron Cahill from Heriot-Watt University, many thanks again. We will keep you in touch. And also we have made a recording of this webinar. And later on, we will send the recording to everyone who registered for this event. And we will also post it on the YouTube channel. So we will also send out Bob and Marilena's email to everyone in case you may have some questions want to ask. I think both of you are happy to share your emails, right?
Yeah, sure.
Right.
Okay.
Sure, for sure. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. That's all. I think many thanks to everyone for participating in this event, and have a wonderful day or the week. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you very much. Happy to see you.
Okay.
Bye, Bob.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Keep on fracking. Bye-bye.
All
Bye.
right.